welcome to the Fosgail Mindset. I am your host, Myka Kennedy-Stevens, founder and CEO of Fosgail. And today I am in conversation with Kelly Campbell. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Kelly is one of our senior consultants at Fosgail. She is also the Associate Dean of Information Services and Director of the Library at Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. Kelly's been involved in theological education for 20 years and holds a doctorate of education in organizational leadership. We're really happy to have Kelly on the Fosgail team. She's been an invaluable partner and colleague over the last couple of years as we've started Fosgail because she's experienced teaching and consulting with theological librarians on a global scale. So, Kelly, the topic that we've come together on this podcast today to talk about is the Leadership Development Program for Theological Librarians. So this is a program that we've been doing for 2 years. Thought it would be helpful in the context of thinking about growth and fostering growth in leaders. We've really seen a lot of growth doing this program, haven't
We
we?
definitely have.
So I thought we might start off just reflecting on what inspired us to start this program.
For me, I participated in a leadership colloquium, probably 15 years ago, because you had to be a new theological librarian to participate. And so I went to this colloquium. I met other new theological librarians. Even though I was a seasoned librarian, I was a brand new theological librarian. And so there's uniquenesses that were in the context here. And so from that, I just grew immensely. I met colleagues that I've had for the rest of my time in the career, and I just learned a whole lot. It was just very valuable to me. After I came back from that program continued for a couple of years, and I even sent other librarians to that, and they came back with a similar experience. But that program has since ceased, and nothing has been around for theological librarians. Theological librarians are kind of a niche in a way. It's still librarianship values and qualities, but then it's put in this particular context, in the theological context. I had been wanting and been asking about coming up with a leadership development for theological librarians. We're also an industry that is graying. We're shrinking in a lot of ways with the changing landscape. And so I'd been looking for something. And so when we started talking about that, I was really excited. Part of it is the training and developing and getting leaders for the next generation of theological librarians, and then also the opportunity to use some of the skills I had gained when I'd working on my doctorate. So that was kind of my inspiration behind it. What was your inspiration?
So I remember that colloquium. I think I started my directorship right as that final colloquium was taking shape. I think they had just closed applications for it. They were starting it up. So I had seen little snippets of it, but that process was in the spring, and that's when I got my job offer. So I was holding on my whole first year in my directorship, waiting for the call to open up, and it never came.
Mm,
And so I was in a position where I was piecing together various different leadership opportunities just to be able to grow
mhm,
and trying to really capitalize on my network and growing my network, finding my own mentors, and trying to figure out how to be a theological library
mhm.
director. So while some folks are very resourceful like that, there's also a lot of folks who either aren't or they don't have the time
Mhm.
to really go through and strategically, reflectively, intentionally seek out opportunities for mentoring and for leadership development and growth like that. And I think over the last 10 years, theological librarianship has been changing quite a bit.
Mhm.
We've seen, as you mentioned, the field is shrinking. There's been this constriction with lower enrollment and school closures and mergers and whatnot. Even the recent changes in the ATS accreditation standards has changed, it's impacted the way theological librarians do their work and how they connect to their schools. And in a lot of ways, it's made it even harder for individual theological librarians to seek out professional development and leadership development. And at the same time, it's become all the more important that they have it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly. And I was thinking back, theological librarians are not good at advocacy. And that's always been a passion of mine. Another passion is anybody can be a leader. You don't have to be in a director position to be a leader. So I think that was part of the attraction to me with our leadership development program is anybody can be a leader no matter what position they may hold within the institution or within the library. Being a leader also teaches you how to be an advocate for your program, for the library, for professional development. You become an advocate for yourself and for your colleagues. So those were two other elements that I wanted us to build into our leadership development, that it wasn't restricted to just the highest level or the highest administrators within a theological library. Anybody can apply and anybody can be an effective leader no matter what role they're in within the structure.
Because being a leader doesn't necessarily mean being an administrator
Correct.
or being a manager, right? It's not just being in a role where people report to you. It's an attitude, it's an outlook, it's a mindset
Mhm.
that you bring to your work.
I think that's part of our philosophy of leadership. There's a lot of materials out there, and people are really surprised that there's not a formula for being a good leader. Anybody can be a good leader. There's different models of leadership. That's part of what we've built into the leadership development program. You can be the leader that you are, and you would be a very effective leader, but you would be a different leader than I am. And that uniqueness speaks to me, particularly in the theological realm, where we're all created in an image and we all have our own skills and abilities. We just need to know how to use them to the best advantage that we have and the way that we're created.
So that sounds like a nice segue into the next part that I wanted to talk about, and that's the goals of the program.
Hmm.
So you're mentioning that emphasis on individual gifts, individual strengths, those qualities within us that make us who we are, and bringing that to our leadership.
Right. So for me, to start, you have to be self-aware. And so many leaders are not self-aware, and particularly when you're in a position of power and you've got a lot of control and a lot of money, if you don't know yourself, then you don't know how you impact others around you. That's part of the reason. One of the goals is that the participants will increase their knowledge and their understanding of basic leadership practices. Leadership is hard to do if you're not aware of what you need to do to be a leader. But once you become aware of some of the basic processes, how you're influencing other people, how you have power in ways that you don't realize, that and being self aware is one of the main goals of the program. I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but also we do a cohort model. And there's reasons for that so that you can build your network. You can have someone else who understands where you are and also someone who's gone through the same training that you have gone through so that there's some common vocabulary. There's someone I can call and say, hey, do you remember when we talked about this? Oh, now I've run up to it and I can't really remember what we talked about. Can you help me do that type of thing? And then the third goal, which was what I just was speaking about, was self-awareness and to gain perspective on who you are within the context that you're out, and what unique contributions that you can make. So we all know there's leaders that would be very dynamic, very persuasive, very engaging, but there's really great leaders who are very quiet and very introverted, and you don't ever see them on a stage and that type of thing. Both types of leaderships are valid. Both types of leaderships have their strengths and value, but it all goes back to the person who's filling the role. It goes back to the individual. So that's why self-awareness of how you're created, who you are, how you deal with different situations directly impacts your leadership and your influence and your ability to be a leader.
Yeah, I agree. All three of those are so vitally important. The awareness of your context, your position, your power, your privilege,
Hmm.
and how that influences and affects those around us. And also that self awareness, that awareness of self in context, and then awareness of self
Hmm.
inwardly, looking inwardly at who you are, how you relate, how your brain works, how certain experiences you had in the past may affect how you respond or react to certain
Mm-hmm.
situations. All of that is so critically important in developing your leadership persona,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then having that cohort model. Let's talk a little bit more about why that cohort model is so important.
I was thinking about that a couple of weeks ago because I talk about leadership a lot with my staff here. But I was saying to them, leadership is working with people. And everyone assumes leadership is, oh, I might have a big budget, or I have all of these responsible decisions to make, or I get the perks of travel, or I have all these important meetings to go through. Leadership is working with people. The reason that you should be in leadership is you like people and you want to work with people. You want to encourage people. You want to develop people. You have to work with people. I mean, that's what leadership is. And so that's why I think the cohort model is so well. They're learning not leadership in a vacuum, but they're learning leadership along with other people, and they're watching other people grow, and they're watching the light bulbs go off in other people's head. That's the best part of leadership. And if you're in any type of leadership position, you're working with people, and you've got to be able to do that well. So we're bringing together diverse theological librarians in different contexts, in different places within the organizational structures, and watching them learn together and watching them grow, experiencing each other's learning. So the cohort model gives them practice of being a leader among people. And that's the whole reason you go into leadership is you want to develop people, you want to inspire people, you want to encourage people. And so as I was saying to my staff a couple of weeks ago, leadership is not about the power. It's not about the important meetings you go to. It's not about the budget. It's not about all the paperwork on your desk. Leadership is about being able to effectively lead people. And people are complex organizations. So that's why we really like the cohort model because you get to experience that in real time as you're learning about being a leader as well. What would you say is some of your reasons that we do the cohort model?
I agree. The cohort model is really helpful in connecting folks together, giving them a shared experience.
Mm,
I think there's so much that happens in this leadership development program, so much that the participants discover about
mhm,
themselves and about leadership and even about their own contexts.
mhm.
It's perception shifting, this experience, and having peers who are going through the same thing with you makes a huge
Mhm,
difference. It helps folks realize that they're not alone.
mhm,
It gives them folks who are going through a similar experience. And so after the program is over, they've got these relationships
mhm,
that they can continue. As much as the content is an enrichment and a takeaway
mhm,
from participating in the program, the relationships are as well.
mhm.
And so that's a piece that it's very difficult to try and replicate in any other way. A cohort model is unique, I think, in that way.
No, I would agree because all of us have taken a course and we've done it online and we've read a book about leadership or something like that, but we didn't have anyone to unpack it with. We didn't have anyone who was going on this shared experience. I think that's a great term for the cohort model. We didn't have anyone to bounce ideas off of. And then we have that longer term relationship that the participants make out of the program that's very invaluable as well. Hmm.
You know, there's something else about the experience of this program and pursuing leadership development in general. And I think we don't like to talk about it much. Maybe it's because we don't want to acknowledge it, but it's vulnerability.
Hmm.
When you start a leadership development journey, when you're on that path, vulnerability is so critical
Hmm.
to successful development. And when you're in a program like this with a cohort of folks, you're all vulnerable together. And there's a bond that's created through that experience that's a really special bond.
Hmm. Well, and the vulnerability leads into the self-assessment and self-awareness. You've got to be vulnerable if you're willing to look at yourself and learn about yourself. And so that just the cohort model reinforces the activities that the participants are going through with the program as well.
if we shift a little bit and kind of take the path down looking at the self-awareness piece a little more closely, we use a couple of psychometric tools in the program. I have become aware recently that psychometric tools are hotly debated. Everyone seems to have a favorite, and everyone also seems to have one that they really don't like. But we've got two psychometric tools that we've been using over the 2 years that we've done this leadership development for Theological Librarians program. I think both of us had worked with them before, but in different contexts. So we brought our own experiences with the tools to the program. But why did we pick these two tools, and what do we like about them?
So I was introduced to the Clifton Strengths over 20 years ago when I moved into theological education. The institution I was at used that with their graduates. When you became a student at the institution, you took the strengths and then you worked with those throughout the end and incorporated them throughout your curriculum. I started employing that with my staff, and I found it's a positive language. For me, Myers-Briggs is too either or, where Clifton Strengths is both and to me, which I think speaks to the new generations that are coming up. So it's positive. It has common language. And so I started using it even when I would interview part-time students to work in the library, and I could find it was pretty accurate. It would give me some clues of how they would be on my team. And so I had used that for over 10 years before I came to this position, and I've used it again for 12 years here. And so even each year, at the beginning of the year, my staff, we review our strengths. It's a good reminder of how we are, who we are, and it gives us language. And so I think that's very important for a leader. It's positive language. Instead of saying you're an introvert, you could say, I have a person who's an ideation person. Well, that means they bring me ideas all the time. It doesn't mean they're going to execute any of the ideas, but they bring me ideas all the time. So that's one particular. I found that the Strength Finder, it's only 80 pages to read. It's not a whole book. It's not a whole study that you have to do compared to some other ones like Enneagram. It's convenient, it's effective, it gives a baseline, and it can be built upon. So that's part of the reasons that I've kind of stuck with the Strength Finder and that we've been using it in this program. How do you feel about this Clifton Strengths?
I like the Strengths Finder. My first experience with it was actually taking it as a deaconess. I worked as a consultant with the Administrative Office of Deaconess and Home Missioner of the United Methodist Church, and it was actually something that had been happening at the board level. Everybody was reading Strengths-Based Leadership. So that was the book that everybody was reading, and taking the Strengths Finder is what it was called then. Now it's the Clifton Strengths. Everybody was taking that and trying to figure out how everyone's strengths fit together. She brought that down to the administrative office level and had all of us, all the staff, as well as all the consultants, read the book and take the test. So that was my introduction to the Clifton Strengths. And at the time, I found it to be extremely helpful in understanding exactly what my strengths were. I think one of the beautiful things about it is that it's not even necessarily, these are the areas where you're stronger. These are the areas where you're not so strong, so therefore these are the areas you need to develop. That's not how it works at all. It's these are your top 5 areas of strength. And so this is where you can funnel your energy to cultivate these strengths, and also to understand what some of the push-pull is. One of my top strengths is responsibility. I know that that's going to be one of my go-to places. I'm going to be focused on being responsible for following through, doing what I say I'm going to do. But at the same time, it makes it very difficult for me to delegate or for competing priorities, right? When you have to be responsible in more than one area and struggling to prioritize those. It not only shows you where you can focus your energy in developing, but it can also show you some of the more nuanced intricacies of those strengths and some of the pitfalls that you might have to be aware of I also like what you said about how the Clifton strengths can be deployed at an organizational level, where you can see how your strengths and the strengths of those you work with complement each other.
I think you just gave a beautiful leadership example of your responsibility. You're now self-aware that you're responsible for everything and that you want to do everything, but you're also aware as a leader that you're going to have to trust other individuals to be responsible and that you can't do everything as a leader. You've got to know who you are so then you can put yourself in the leadership role. That's what we're working with the leadership development program.
So the other psychometric tool that we use is the TKI, or the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. Since we started using it, I have since gone through the process to be certified in the TKI, which I have greatly enjoyed and feel like I know a whole lot more about it now than I did when we started the program. One of the things that I think folks could argue with the TKI is that the creators of the TKI, or at least one of the creators of the TKI, Ralph Kilman, has integrated Myers-Briggs
Right.
and the Jungian personality types into some of the TKI interpretive work, which we don't get into in our leadership development course. And I would argue that it's not essential to use that piece to interpret the TKI results.
I would agree. And again, it's back to the self-awareness. I think what's essential is if leadership is working with people, conflicts are going to happen. Conflicts, the word is just a word that gets blown out of proportion. The definition of a conflict is just a disagreement or a different opinion. It doesn't have to be a huge conflict. But as a leader, you need to know how you deal with conflict. So when you're the person in charge and someone has a different idea, how are you going to respond? And how does your response impact the team? And I agree with all of these tools. There's good and bad of each one. There's depth of different ones. There's scope of them. But in the program, we're trying to at least get a beginning point and to give them some baseline of this is kind of how you are. And you need to kind of work with how you are because that's going to impact your leadership. So I really like the TKI because it just has 5, which are easier to remember, about the way that people deal with conflict. Looking at how you normally deal with conflict. I did that with my staff here when I first came after a year. And of course, I'm a competitive person when it comes to conflict, and the rest of my staff avoids conflict. That's their normal mode. And so I was like, oh, that's why I scare my staff a little bit. Those are the insights that you need with just a basic tool that's effective, easy to administrate. You can always go deeper and broader, but a lot of people have not ever used any kind of psychometric tool at all. And so it's an introduction to that. Again, there's wide varieties out there, and we chose 2 that are well known. We chose 2 that are well researched, that have stood the test of time. But you've got to have something that helps you start getting insight of who you are. And once you know who you are, then how does that impact how you are in a leadership role or when you're doing leadership types of things, you're working with people again. I really like the TKI because it was easy to deal with conflict. It was kind of a positive way of looking at conflict again. I like more positivity. That's a whole different area of leadership, but rather than the negative areas to work on, let's look at how we're already created and then how do we deal with how we're created or enhance or refine how we're created rather than starting with 0 trying to build a skill.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the interesting things about using the TKI is needing to help our participants reframe conflict and reframe the 5 different ways of engaging with conflict in a more neutral light, because I think conflict often has a lot of negative connotation to it, and a lot of the different conflict modes, the words that are used, competing, avoiding, accommodating, a lot of those have some negative connotation as well. And so helping folks kind of reframe those words to think about those times when avoiding is actually really beneficial, when avoiding gives everyone space to breathe, to collect themselves again, to avoid hurting each other. That, I think, is one of the really unique and special opportunities that we have in working with the TKI and self-awareness. One of the other things that I really like about the TKI too, though, is when you're defining what conflict is, it looks at conflict from a problem-solving perspective, which I think is so immensely helpful. And I think particularly for us as librarians, approaching things from a problem-solving perspective, it's a lot of how we approach that reference interview, how we approach helping patrons. And so even those kinds of interactions where you wouldn't necessarily define it as conflict,
Right.
it's an interaction with someone where there's a problem to be solved, and understanding that your preferred modes are likely going to be different from the other person's preferred modes, and even understanding things like the fear of coming up to the circulation desk or the fear of coming up to the reference desk to ask a question. Taking the TKI and understanding conflict and the different conflict modes can help understand the different layers of all sorts of interactions that we have with each other. So, do you have a special memory that stands out from doing these programs over the last couple of years?
The one that I was thinking about is because with the program, we bring people in for a 2 or 3 day retreat in person. And during that time, it is a retreat. It's not working. It's a retreat built in with some more self-reflection and self-awareness. And in one of our group coaching sessions, they were tasked with creating a poem. And I can't remember the specific assignment. I was blown away with the poems that they came up with. They were so creative, and it was on a short time. Maybe it's a younger generation, and my generation doesn't get that at all. But I mean, these were like publishable poems. They were so good. And so it was so exciting to see the imagination, the creativity, the dedication and energy they put into that simple assignment. I always remember that because I was just like, never in 100 years could I come up with anything like they came up with. But it was kind of the culmination, in a sense, of the program, and to see the fruits of that happening before your eyes was just a joy. And so that's one of my favorite memories. What is one of yours?
It's the coming together for that retreat. I think that's something really special that we've been able to do with these two cohorts. So, for our listeners, I just want to give a little insight. At the time that we're recording this podcast, we are preparing for the retreat for the second group. The second cohort is not quite done yet, and we'll be coming together for the retreat in a week after we've recorded this. We have 4 workshops throughout the year where we gather online, and then we come together for a retreat. The 4 online workshops, it's such a short time where we just get to see each other as the little boxes on the screen. It's when we all gather at Columbia Theological Seminary and when we're all sharing the same space that we get to see each other outside of our little boxes. That's been one of the most meaningful parts of leading these cohorts. I agree. Doing the group coaching exercise that resulted in those poems, that was a great memory. I'm also just remembering the times we do some field trips with the groups. We go visit the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park, and we go visit the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum. And visiting those two places, seeing the lives of those two men who were contemporaries of each other and from the same part of the country, similar commitments to faith, social justice, visiting both of those places and being able to take our cohort there and see how they experience this. I think another thing for our listeners, so Kelly, you and I, neither of us are natives of Georgia.
No.
But you currently live in Decatur, and I had lived in Decatur for almost 10 years before you came to Decatur. Between the two of us, we've got 20 plus years of living in the Atlanta area. So I think for us, those places are more familiar.
Right.
And bringing in the cohort members who may or may not be from the Atlanta area or even from Georgia, sharing those pieces of local Atlanta history that is also so relevant to United States history and even to the world.
There's a uniqueness in Atlanta, the birth of civil rights, and what's going on. Atlanta as a spot for the retreat is very intentional, and I don't know that we would get that in other particular cities. The other piece of that is the idea that we bring people who may come from a very small town and it's their first time in a large metro area. It's part of that leadership, flying into the world's busiest airport, being able to take an Uber to find a campus, to be able to navigate in unfamiliar territory. That's part of leadership and risk taking and being confident in yourself. I don't know that I'd really reflected on a lot of the retreat. The location has a lot of intentionality built into it that maybe we were not aware of because we're familiar with the location. But from our participants coming from small towns or other parts of the country, Atlanta is a mecca for African American people. Encountering a different population and culture and context with you're here is very different too. I think we've got a sweet spot with that, with having the retreat in Atlanta.
So I think before we leave, do we want to talk a little bit about what our hopes and plans and dreams for the future of this program are?
Oh, I hope that it continues. I think we have a really good working model. I hope that we can continue to inspire and create and develop future theological librarians and even librarians broadly. I think libraries right now really need advocates. And personally, I think our whole country needs leadership. Development is one of the areas that we're suffering in corporations and institutions across the board. That's a passion of mine, is to continue a leadership development program broadly, but then particularly for theological education, because that's my guild that I've spent the last 20 years in. The one thing we haven't told our listeners is the assignment after the end of the retreat is to develop a personal leadership development plan. They have to plan out how they're going to implement and continue their leadership development for the next year. Seeing them come up with those ideas, and it's not just book knowledge, it's being embodied knowledge of what we've provided for them that they can then build on and grow, has been very valuable, and I hope that we can continue to do that in some fashion in the future for sure.
Yeah, I agree. After the first year doing the cohort, we moved into the Fosgail community as a place to host these cohort groups. And I think that move has been a very positive one. We set up a space for the first cohort. So even though they didn't start in the Fosgail community, they've got their own space now as a way to stay connected with one another. And then the group that we're doing now, cohort number 2, they have their own space that they've been using since the beginning. Because it's all in one section within the Fosgail community, we were able to create an inter-cohort networking space. So I think that's another level of cohort and networking that we had hoped to bring to the program that I think we're starting to see the fruits of now that we've got 2 groups, with the second group getting ready to complete their program year. So my hope is that any future cohorts, everyone would be welcomed into that inner cohort space where they get to interact with folks who have also gone through the program, but maybe in a different cohort. You had mentioned earlier when we were talking about the cohort experience, the importance of having that common language and being able to talk with folks and ask questions of folks or even commiserate and celebrate as well with folks who have had that similar experience and have that language and who understand kind of where you're coming from or what's informed you, formed and informed you as you're going through this leadership development journey. And so I think by helping folks who go through the different cohorts connect with one another, creating community there, it's one of my hopes that we continue to build that and foster that for the future.
Well, I think that intergenerational cohort is building a community of learning. and hopefully a community and learning of leaders for theological libraries and beyond for the future.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice to be able to say that you're working a little bit, maybe contributing and giving back to a field that's given me a lot. So
Well,
thank you for the opportunity to visit about it. It's a joy, and it reminds me of why the work is important when we talk about what we've been doing. Because sometimes you get into, this is a trap of leadership. Sometimes you get into doing the activities, but you need to stop every once in a while and reflect of why you're doing the activities and for what purpose. So thank you for the opportunity.
well, thank you for joining me, and I really appreciated this conversation. I hope our listeners have as well. And if anyone is interested in joining a cohort or exploring more about the Leadership Development for Theological Librarians program or a version of the Leadership Development program for librarians in general, I encourage you to stay connected. Watch the Fosgail website. If you're interested in sponsoring a cohort of the Leadership Development for Librarians program, we encourage you to be in touch. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us. This has been the Fosgail Mindset. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation between myself and Kelly Campbell. If you did and would like to stay connected, we offer two special opportunities. One is to sign up for Fosgail's newsletter, Field Notes. It goes out monthly and includes prompts for reflection, the latest from our blog and podcast, upcoming opportunities, and behind-the-scenes miscellanea and news from the Fosgail team. The second is to join the Fosgail community. It's a membership platform that provides a space for discussion, encouragement, inspiration, and support. The Always Open, Forever Free tier is open to anyone who's looking for a safe and supportive space to explore the challenges of leadership in uncertain times and cultivating professional well-being. Kelly and I hoped to see you there. Links to join the community and sign up for the newsletter are in the show notes. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Fosgail Mindset. Please subscribe using your favorite podcast provider so that you can receive new episodes as we drop them. Until next time, I hope you find open possibilities.